Today at the National Press Club, the Minister for Skills and Training, Andrew Giles. Minister Giles will discuss the government's plans to create a more productive labour market and address workforce shortages. Skills and Training Minister Andrew Giles with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. My name's Tom Connell, I'm the club's president and anchor at Sky News Australia. Today's guest is Andrew Giles, the Minister for Skills and Training. This week is the launch of the 2025 National Skills Week. The Minister highlighting the government's vision for skills development and workforce innovation and exploring future opportunities in vocational education and training for obviously, if we can find out at the end of this how we're going to get an on-time and on-budget house being built in the country, that would probably be something a lot of people want to hear about. Please join me in welcome Andrew Giles to the podium.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon. I begin my remarks by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respect to elders, past and present. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I also want to recognise Minister Michael Pedersen, the ACT Minister for Skills, Training and Industrial Relations, Professor Barney Glover, Commissioner of Jobs and Skills Australia, Megan Lilly, Deputy Commissioner of JSA, and Paul Erickson, National Secretary of the Australian Labor Party, Liam O'Brien, the ACTU Assistant Secretary, Emmeline Gasky, National Secretary of the Australian Services Union, Michael Wright, the National Secretary of the Electrical Trades Union, as well as many other familiar faces in the room, including, of course, from the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. And thank you to the National Press Club for the opportunity to speak with you today about skilling Australia's future. Something that's central to both our future prosperity and the sense of fairness that's woven into what it means to be an Australian. Something that I'm passionately committed to. Australia's greatest asset is our people. Australians are capable, resilient and creative, and together we hold the potential to tackle the challenges facing Australia and realising the opportunities of the decade ahead. But the world is changing and the systems meant to support Australia's skilled workers to be at their best have not always kept up. The truth is, skills and training was neglected under the Coalition in the decade up to 2022. A decade of cuts and neglect carries consequences for individuals and for our economy. Since the election of the Albanese government, we've made important progress in turning this around. Free TAFE, establishing Jobs and Skills Australia, and the landmark $30 billion National Skills Agreement. These are the foundations of the project that we are determined to build. We want to break down the barriers that stop Australians from fulfilling their potential, enabling Australia to fulfil its potential. And we'll do that by restoring integrity and a sense of purpose to the training system and the relationships it sustains. Because skilling Australians for the jobs of the future is nation building. I come to my role as Minister for Skills and Training as someone who wants to solve problems and as someone who brings people together. Almost every national goal depends on skilled workers to deliver it, from net zero to building homes to making more things in Australia to caring for our youngest and oldest citizens. The world of work is changing fast with technology, automation and AI reshaping industries. The skills and training portfolio is where we help people keep up, get ahead and stay included. It's how we open doors, especially for those who've been left out. This is the problem the Albanese government wants to solve. Preparing Australians for the future of work, making sure that no one is held back and that no one is left behind, to build a better and fairer nation. This relies on partnerships with states and territories, with industry, with unions, with Australians in all their diversity. In my time in politics, I've built partnerships and I've built trust. At the Jobs and Skills Summit, I worked with business and unions to find common ground. And through the Ministerial Forum in Multicultural Affairs, I brought together colleagues to share perspectives and learn from one another. In skills, I've called my counterparts together to respond collectively to critical issues like apprentice safety and productivity. I keep my door open to business, to workers and their unions, to students and to experts. And I listen. When Labor came to office in 2022, Australia faced the worst skill shortage in half a century, the second worst across all advanced economies. This didn't happen overnight, nor did it happen by accident. The previous government tore funding out of TAFE and training. They failed to secure a national skills agreement with the states and territories. From 2012 to 2020, apprenticeships and traineeships dropped sharply. The only substantive investments the Liberals and the Nationals made in training were the untargeted and uncapped traineeship funds, BAC and CAC, which cost around $7 billion. They turned a blind eye to shonky providers taking cash for qualifications, and this failure eroded trust in vocational qualifications. Last month, the OECD released a report on the state of the labour markets of advanced economies. The report highlighted some challenging trends, in particular ageing populations and flatlining labour productivity. The report also shows the critical role that skills policy can play in supporting both a more productive economy and a society in which everyone can effectively contribute. It flags the importance of ensuring that technology, in particular AI, is harnessed to improve labour productivity, and also makes clear the importance of looking to participation, to open doors formerly shut. The Albanese government, starting with the Jobs and Skills Summit, has taken action to make our skills and training system more effective and more inclusive. But there's more to do. As Minister, I have three key priorities which I will outline today. To break down the barriers between vocational education and training and higher education so that they are equally valued. To promote and support lifelong learning, and to strengthen the partnerships that will help us realise our national ambitions. But before I do that, I want to pay tribute to the work of my friend Brendan O'Connor. Thanks to his leadership, we've made real progress in breaking down barriers to accessing skills and training and in better understanding our labour market. We've been building a system that is fit for our national purpose, starting with Jobs and Skills Australia. JSA is now an essential part of our skills and workforce architecture. It's a vital national asset for policymakers and the wider community too to understand our labour market and how it is changing. As Brendan said, too often governments have treated skills as an afterthought, but not the Albanese government. JSA places skills at the centre of our national agenda through its data and analytical capacities, as demonstrated by recent studies on generative AI and on regional labour markets. Sitting alongside this body are 10 tripartite jobs and skills councils, industry-led bodies with a strategic approach to training, to look more broadly at workforce planning, so that we have the right people in the right places with access to the right pathways. Another key part of our skills and training architecture is the National Skills Agreement. This agreement is much more than a transaction framework. It's a 5-year partnership with all states and territories to deliver genuine, lasting reform. Reform that contributes to the type of country that we are trying to build, that seeks to connect individual aspiration to our collective goals in practical ways. By working together to strengthen foundation skills, to lift vet completions, to close the gap, and to support our teaching and training workforce, we can deliver real change to the lives of Australians and to advance our prosperity. Now, a foundation of our reform has been integrity, because the sad truth is that some unscrupulous operators of registered training organisations have demonstrated that they valued what people would pay for, not the quality of their training. The Nixon Review exposed shocking behaviour. Shocking behaviour, and an equally shocking failure on the part of the former government to do anything about it. Since 2022, though, we've taken real action to restore integrity to the vet sector. Our government has invested more than $37 million in ASQA, the vet regulator, and thanks to this and to new powers, integrity compliance operations are surging. More than 25,000 qualifications have been cancelled and dodgy operators are being put out of business. But the cost of the previous government's neglect goes beyond these raw numbers. It's undermined confidence, hurt the majority of good providers, and held back our efforts to see VET properly valued. We need systems we can trust and which serve our national purposes. The people doing caring work or building our homes must have the qualifications that they have earned and that we can all count on. Australians trust TAFE qualifications. So as I've acted to clean up our VET sector, I've listened to many Australians who've enrolled in free TAFE. To students like Caitlin, single mum, Navy veteran from just outside of Canberra who's studying nursing, who told me how free TAFE has meant that she can cover the cost of her son's after school activities. Caitlin, I can't wait to join you at your graduation in May. And Bradley, a young father who went back to study at TAFE SA. He says free TAFE has allowed him to pursue a career without the concern of whether or not he can even afford to study and change careers years after leaving high school. Free TAFE has now seen more than 650,000 enrolments across the country. 170,000 of those courses have already been completed. Free TAFE is breaking down barriers and destigmatising the idea that learning is only for the young. More than 125,000 Australians aged 45 and over have enrolled. Like Karen, a cancer survivor, a single mother of 5 who went back to TAFE to study conservation. Free TAFE was designed to reach people who had previously been locked out of training opportunities. And it's working. 160,000 enrolments from job seekers, 50,000 from people with disability. Women comprise 62% of free TAFE enrolments. Free TAFE opens doors that would otherwise have stayed shut, holding Australians back, leaving Australians behind. Hundreds of thousands of Australians, like Caitlin, Bradley and Karen, deeply value the skills free TAFE has opened up for them. And in the Albanese government, we deeply value them, their talents and the contributions they are making to their communities. So we've made free TAFE permanent. For generations, an apprenticeship has been the pathway through which Australians have acquired important skills, earning and learning. Now, while there's increasing interest in expanding the model, traditional apprenticeships are under pressure, producing skill shortages in critical sectors like manufacturing and clean energy, frustrating our national ambitions. So the importance of landing the right settings for apprentices, their employers and those who train them cannot be overstated. Behind every apprenticeship, there's also a real person, like Cooper, an apprentice fitter and turner from Adelaide and an AMWU delegate. I've had the opportunity to listen to a lot of apprentices, and while the majority do have positive experiences, we must ensure that every apprentice feels valued and supported in learning their trade. That's why last year I brought together my ministerial colleagues to ensure that we have a zero tolerance approach when it comes to apprentice safety and wellbeing. This has informed a refreshed National Code of Good Practice for apprenticeships and traineeships. This had been last updated in 2012. The fact is, we need more Australians starting an apprenticeship and more of them to finish. In 2012, there were around 350,000 commencements and 180,000 completions. In 2022, the numbers were respectively 180,000 and 100,000. So this is a long-running challenge, which will require sustained effort to resolve. But we are working to turn this around. Last year, we commissioned a strategic review into apprenticeship incentives to guide this work. And as an initial response, we've increased 2 payments. One to support apprentices living away from home, the other to encourage employers to take on an apprentice with a disability. These were last increased, respectively, in 2003 and in 1998. This illustrates how and for how long we have neglected this pillar of our skills and training and workforce planning systems. And it points to the importance of properly valuing VET pathways. Now, this wasn't the case under the former government. BAC and CAC show us that a wage subsidy is no substitute for a considered approach. Grill's infamous Hamburger University being just the most egregious example. Now we're making some progress, focused on meeting our national goals. There are 50,000 more apprentices in training now than prior to the pandemic. And construction industry apprentice numbers are also up, almost 28% higher. We are prioritising homes, not hamburgers. We also know that in 8 of 10 non-completions, it's the apprentice who brings the relationship to an end. So I've been listening to apprentices like Cooper, then acting to prevent this waste of potential and productivity by saying no to the poor practices that have left apprentices undervalued, exploited and worse. Exploring more group training options for small and medium businesses because we hear and we see that this works. Supporting good work in jurisdictions across Australia through the National Skills Agreement. Making available relevant pre-apprenticeship courses through free TAFE because evidence shows that these boost completion rates. Our key apprenticeship program in energy and housing has been designed with completions in mind too. A $10,000 incentive paid in instalments, recognising the importance of cost of living support across the whole of the apprenticeship. In its first month, the housing stream of this program saw almost 1,300 apprentice sign-ups. Top 3 occupations: carpenters, electricians and plumbers, all essential in building the homes Australia needs. I've been engaging with unions and with industry on our response to the review, and soon I will be beginning wider consultations to understand how we can do better by apprentices today and to open up the apprenticeship pathway to more Australians into the future, to see government investment deliver the biggest dividends and to encourage a deeper commitment from employers when it comes to training their workforces. Skilling up Australian workers is an obvious driver of increased labour productivity. It's also important to look to participation. Fundamentally, every Australian should be able to see themselves in every job. Right now, too many don't, and this matters. Jobs and Skills Australia's research shows us that nearly 80% of Australian occupations are not gender balanced. This is exacerbating skill shortages, and as Deputy Commissioner Megan Lilly has said, it's a handbrake on our economy. OECD research backs this up too. In occupations that are gender balanced, there are less likely to be shortages. The same goes where we have a mix of ages and where people with disability are present. There are real benefits to broadening participation. We know diverse workplaces are more productive, and our government is investing to make sure that we capture these benefits. We're supporting women to succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields, including through the Building Women's Careers program. This includes Building Futures, a program breaking down barriers for women entering plumbing, where, in Narre I met Jackie, not only an excellent plumber, but also an advocate for more women to get involved. And encouragingly, 32% more women have now started trade apprenticeships compared to pre-pandemic numbers. Apprentices like Zara, who I met at a factory in Brisbane. Zara is part of a growing group of women in the clean energy industry. She's leading the way for others, having created a peer support network. And then there's Jill, one of about 40,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've enrolled in free TAFE. I met Jill on Thursday Island as she was about to get back on a plane to work as a childcare educator in her community. As the Prime Minister said at Garma, we want to ensure that remote communities have access to the benefits of TAFE. That's where our $31 million mobile TAFE program comes in, a partnership with Aboriginal controlled organisations to deliver the skills people want and that their communities need. Jackie, Zara and Jill, all making their own contributions on their own terms, building their careers and building our nation. Our work since coming to government has laid solid foundations, addressing urgent skills needs and opening up more opportunities to more Australians. To build on this, I'm focused on the 3 key priorities I mentioned earlier: equally valuing VET, supporting lifelong learning, and strengthening the partnerships that we have established. When I refer to valuing VET, I am concerned that in Australia we don't have what Professor Barney Glover refers to as parity of esteem between the tertiary pathways. We should. 9 out of 10 new jobs will require some form of tertiary education, approximately half vet and half higher education. Right now, we're not on track to match qualifications to job requirements. We need to change this. By saying that vet doesn't mean plan B, because it's not and it can't be. Vet is a key driver of national productivity and of individual opportunity. Now, I've heard so many inspiring stories in this regard, like that of Matt, last year's Apprentice of the Year. While he was studying biomedicine at uni, he worked at a butcher's. He made the choice to pursue butchery through an apprenticeship, and Matt is not looking back. Celebrating Matt's achievements sends this message, as does recognising our amazing skilleroos, a team of Australia's best apprentices and trainees. Free TAFE sends that message too, as does work on valuing the apprenticeship pathway. So too, cleaning out the dodgy operators who have undermined the sector, and valuing the teachers and the trainers who really are our vet system. Every time I visit a TAFE, I meet passionate teachers, deeply connected to their industries and committed to training that next generation. And that's why I'm pleased to announce today a $30 million investment in our vet trainer workforce. This will grow the number of electrical and construction vet teachers and the number of First Nation vet teachers. As Jason Clare said last week at the AFR Higher Education Summit, we'll only achieve our national goal of 4 in 5 Australians holding a TAFE qualification or a university degree if we break down that artificial barrier between vocational education and higher education. A barrier to meeting the needs of our modern economy that contributes to skills mismatches and shortages in critical areas. There is an important role in this work for the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, but also through partnerships with academia, with unions and industry. That's why Jason Clare, Amanda Rishworth and I brought together experts at a tertiary education roundtable just a few weeks ago. ATEC has been tasked with leading the development of a tertiary roadmap to identify the next steps to make it easier for students to move between TAFE and university and to set up the system to support students to gain qualifications matched to Australia's future skills needs. In the meantime, we've started on accelerating self-accreditation for TAFE. Put simply, this means getting more skills into the labour market sooner. This year, a pilot saw 3 providers develop an accredited vet course tailored to its local labour market in less than 6 months, like the Diploma in Digital Innovation delivered by Bendigo Kangan TAFE. There's an opportunity here to have our TAFE centres of excellence which partner with universities and industry drive this acceleration. There are now 12 centres focused on areas like modern forms of housing construction, clean energy, early childhood education and care. These centres really are tertiary harmonization in action, partnerships led by states and territories and between TAFEs and universities and industry to develop the skills and the qualifications to enable us to shape our key priorities. This is making tangible our ambitions for the National TAFE Network, another driver of productivity as we better share understandings around this country. We need to think too about how we better engage Australians in conversations about their careers. The House of Representatives inquiry into perceptions and status of vet, chaired by Lisa Chesters, provides many useful insights as to how we can, in practical ways, better value vet in this critical context. So, now we have some good material to work with. The data that JSA has showing where opportunity lies and the capacities of the Jobs and Skills Councils to inform careers conversations, bringing industry into the picture much more effectively. The broad consensus from participants at the Economic Reform Roundtable around the JSC's roles demonstrates the importance and potential of these tripartite bodies to reshape how we support people into jobs and through careers. Lifelong learning is fundamental to my approach to skills and training. It's the concept that knits together how we should be thinking about supporting people to navigate a changing world on their terms, moving beyond a narrow sense of equipping a person to perform a role. Because jobs are changing and we know that people can now expect to move between industries, not simply between employers. Exploring all options, the theme of this National Skills Week, including valuing the informal learning that people gain through experiences, as well as understandings gained outside of this country by migrants. It's how we keep more people better connected to work and the benefits, not only economic but social too, that come from it. In the context of generative AI, and indeed more generally, we're witnessing changes in demand for skills. We should anticipate that this accelerates. We should also be looking to engage workers effectively in this process of change to realise its benefits. So, I agree with the OECD's assessment that this calls for upskilling approaches that are fast, targeted and accessible to everyone, not just those in formal education. Approaches like our expanded Skills for Education and Employment program, which recognises that we need a broader approach to building foundation skills. There's also our approach to fast-tracking the qualifications of 6,000 tradespeople. Master Builders research tell us that for every newly qualified tradie, an additional 2.4 houses can be built every year. We recognise that there are workers who already have the experience, who are ready to step up, but haven't been able to get qualifications. And provided they can demonstrate they have the level of competency needed, they shouldn't be prevented from getting recognised sooner. Similarly, there's some work underway and more work to be progressed to ensure that migrants who are here can work to their potential and that those coming here can get to work more efficiently. Too many have been held back from making their contributions to this country. Recognition of prior learning's been given a bad name by dodgy providers and a failure to tackle their behaviour. But our focus on effective regulation and enforcement means that we can see more Australians recognised for the skills they possess. With the states, we've created new standards for VET qualifications to improve quality, simplify course design and reduce complexity. This represents a shift away from a one-size-fits-all approach to qualification design and a step towards lifting the relevance and value of VET qualifications for students and employers. This is important to enabling a joined-up tertiary system, to valuing lifelong learning and to productivity. The final theme I want to touch on is partnerships with purpose. Skilling Australia's future is a shared enterprise, necessarily so, both because governmental responsibilities are diffuse and because in workplaces and communities around the country there are lessons to be learned. We need more investment in skills, indeed in the sort of lifetime learning I've just spoken of from our businesses, and more engagement in skills matching, reskilling and upskilling more generally. That's how we maximise the benefits of technology and maximise the contributions of Australians. Such as through the commitment of Economic Roundtable participants last week to work with industry and with unions on digital and AI skills, guided by a number of recommendations made in the JSA AI report. It's how we get productivity moving and shape a labour market that's fit for the future. I'm thinking about the next National Skills Agreement and making the most of free TAFE beyond 2026, and more broadly, to seek to build on the systems that we have developed so that they are as resilient and as adaptable as the learners and workers they need to support. Taking us back to first principles, how can we best bring out the talent in Australians, and how can we align this with our national goals? Building consensus around what it is we're seeking to achieve, and then how should we go about this together, working with the states and territories, with unions, employers, students and educators to solve the next problem, not the last one. We're a big country with extraordinary natural advantages, but it's people who make Australia, who tell our national story in distinct and diverse voices. What makes us unique isn't just the landscape, it's that we have the understanding and knowledge of the world's oldest continuing cultures and the perspectives of every culture on the planet. This diversity is such a strength that we need to realise to enable the jobs of the future and secure satisfying future careers for those who are doing them. To set in place the systems and the partnerships to open more doors to more opportunities and support a common purpose. Now's the time for Manning Clark's enlargers, recognising opportunities we can give to people to expand their horizons and our prospects. Because relying on luck is no plan for a fairer and better future, nor is washing our hands of responsibility, which is the Liberals' approach. as set out by Susan Lee in opposition to the free TAFE legislation. In asserting the Liberal principle that if you don't pay for something, you don't value it, she made clear their approach when it comes to preparing Australia to face the future. The Liberals continue to say to Australians, you're on your own, that aspiration should be confined by circumstances, and that somehow we can secure our future without giving everyone a stake in it. So that's the choice before us. We can choose to invest in people, in skills and in the future. We can fall behind. This Albanese Labor government chooses to invest, to take responsibility, to seek to shape our future, not simply to submit to the forces around us. We choose to believe in the capacities of every Australian, in how good we can be when we support everyone to fulfil their potential and to make their contribution. We can secure Australia's future through committing to skilling Australians. Nation building. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Interested in this term, the parity of esteem in terms of vocational training, that we're still not there. What do you put that down to? Is that primarily what young people are choosing, or are they strongly influenced by parents that might think aiming highest is a degree, at a university, law, whatever it might be, medicine?
I think it's all of the above, and I think it's also important to recognise that this is not an Australian phenomenon exclusively. Across the OECD, we're seeing a very similar mismatch between the sort of jobs young people are looking to do and what the labour markets are demanding. And I think there's a lot of cultural questions that underpin this around expectations and what we value as a society. So I think when we're looking at turning this around, if we're looking to make sure that young Australians and older Australians too have good choices around their pathways to satisfying secure jobs and careers, there's a cultural element. But there's also a really important signalling responsibility for government and indeed across the community.
I know you've got a 13-year-old you're worried might start going for St Kilda because she's Carlton now, but her favourite player is Tom de Koning. So I know what advice you'll have for her on that. What about vocationally? What if she says to you, I'm really keen on going down the skills path? How much would you encourage her? Maybe you say, hey, I did a law degree and I'm the member for Scullin and I know Paul pretty well, he'll sort you out. What would your advice be?
Well, I'm pretty confident that my example won't be what she'll be first looking to when she thinks of a career. So that is helpful in terms of, I think when I think about parities of esteem, I'm not sure my household is really the way in which it can
maybe the law degree though?
Articulated. Look, I think this is a really important question for those of us with kids, and mine are in teen years, to try and encourage them to have good conversations about matching the things that they are good at and the things that they are interested in with the sort of opportunities that are there for them. This is a really important conversation. It's something that we can do much better. It's not simply a question for the curriculum, it is a question for parents like me, to try and build a better sense of matching those individual aspirations to where opportunity lies. As I say, there's a big responsibility for government. When we think about the universities accord, I think this is a really important underpinning principle. It's why also tertiary harmonization is absolutely critical, because I think this artificial barrier we've had that's separated vocational education and training from higher education has held back so many people from making these choices. So I think being able to think about maybe some of those high-level policy things, where we go with credit transfer, with qualification reform. These are technical pieces of work that maybe Carolyn will talk a bit about tomorrow, that are fundamental, but they'll only be meaningful if the conversations in the households, in the lunchrooms, around Australia reflect, the parity of esteem. I think it's a really important concept to not suggest that there is some sort of hierarchy from going to medicine at the top to something that's not an ATAR score at the other. I think that is a challenge that we've really got to grapple with as a society and in households like my own.
Bit of word association, just noting, you're in a safe space, you can be instinctive on this. AI.
It's an opportunity that we need to realise by making everyone a stakeholder in its adoption.
And to the extent that someone could be a stakeholder, the unions, for example, want any business that proposes to use AI come with that a job guarantee. Is that too high a bar, too restrictive?
Well, one of the things I've been a bit frustrated about in the conversation that's played out about the role of generative AI over the last couple of weeks is I actually think there's not an enormous gap between the various positions that have been articulated. I think the report that JSA has done is a really useful guide for policymakers and I guess for concerned community members as well. I think there is really broad agreement about getting the balance right between opportunities and some of the downside risks, particularly social licence. There are conversations which are complicated ones that need to play out as to how we get it right. I look at what happened at the Economic Reform Roundtable in this space, and I actually think there was a direction of travel that reflected a reasonably broad consensus around those objectives. Getting there, obviously, there are further conversations to be had, which is unsurprising given the scale of the transformation that we can anticipate.
That's a pretty high bar, though, and in reality, AI is already being used in a lot of places.
Yeah, but I think if you think about what the report tells us about its likely impact on tasks, on roles, and the opportunity to realise its benefits, particularly through a productivity lens, there's obviously a really critical role for the workers doing the tasks to think about how they can be doing them more productively.
Or different tasks.
Or different tasks.
So in that situation, a job might go and another one might be created.
Well, that's it.
Is that something you're comfortable with?
I think the frame is really about making sure that we are realising all the opportunities where augmentation is the role. And thinking about what that means for managers and workers is a really important set of questions.
And for the workers, mid-career training is going to be more and more important. Who needs to pay for that?
Well, there's got to be everyone, frankly. I mean, when we talk about foundational skills and lifelong learning, I think traditionally if anyone is in this room or watching is thinking about foundational skills, they're thinking about traditional literacy and numeracy. I think that conversation has expanded to think about those soft skills that go to employability and working in teams, increasingly to digital skills in a general sense. I think we've got to think about engaging with AI as foundational. So in that, there is a role for government, but there's also going to be a role for employers, of course.
So free TAFE is one thing, but the biggest cost for someone is not working while they're maybe 45 and they've got a mortgage. How do you tackle that problem?
Well, again, one of the things that I'm really proud of is the way in which we've opened the door to skills for education and employment to try and find ways, no cost to the user, to build a bit of a bridge between where that 45-year-old is.
Training on the job, is that the only way that can really happen?
Well, I think there are possibly some things that might happen before the training on the job when it comes to gaps in terms of digital skills and perhaps AI skills, some other foundational skills. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and that's one of the reasons why I really highlight a focus on lifelong learning as being absolutely fundamental to meeting our skills challenges.
All right, let's go to the floor. Julie Hare from the AFR.
Minister, thank you for your speech. In your speech, you said that you were willing to explore all options. I would like to mention a report by Jobs and Skills Australia last year in May 2024 called Apprenticeships, a Missing Pathway for International Students. It had a number of recommendations, including for a pilot program to be run by at least one state or territory. Now, before I get to my actual question, I just need to run you through some numbers. Peter Hurley, who is an academic at Victoria University, said between 2015 and 2024 there was an explosion in construction course enrolments, including a 2,000% increase in Certificate 3 and 4 building courses. And there was a 7,500% increase in civil engineering diplomas. This is among international students. Under current rules, these people can't work as a tradie because they haven't done the work placement experience that is the essential part of the apprenticeship. But there is no doubt that the explosion in enrolments in these courses is because they're getting jobs on building sites. So what is your explanation as to why international students can't enrol in full apprenticeships? And can you address whether the reason is because the Labor government is beholden to unions, including the CFMEU?
Well, I can answer the second part of your question, and that's a no. What I can say is that this question of how do we better match... I'll take it a step back. The issues that you raise have been talked about for a long time, this concept of an international apprenticeship. People have struggled to articulate exactly what they mean by an international apprenticeship and to link it to the sort of visa options that are available to international students. Obviously, most international students have to meet, well, they all have to meet the requirement of now the genuine student test, which does prevent a challenge in the structure of our visa system and how it relates to our work system. The principal purpose of someone coming here as an international student is obviously not to work, it's to study. What we have sought to do since coming into government more broadly is to better align our migration, particularly skilled migration, and our domestic skilling through a range of measures, changes to the TISMIT being a very obvious one, the work across the migration strategy led by Minister O'Neill that I had a hand in, and of course the work that Minister O'Connor did that I've just touched upon. As we look at the current debate about international education, there's a really important question to be asked, particularly around VET, that will be informed by more recent work that JSA have done, is doing rather, about international student outcomes, to make sure that we have a principle-based approach to this. Is there ongoing demand for people to come here to gain skills in Australia to use them in the Australian labour market? Does the Australian government see that as a critical pathway that's consistent with our broader attitude to international education?
Okay, I'm still not entirely clear whether, we have a skills gap. We know there is a shortage of apprentices and a shortage of tradies. And we know that 50% of apprentices drop out of domestic apprentices, but we have no way that an international student can enrol in a full apprenticeship. And it doesn't mean that we can't change visa rules to allow that.
Well, what I'm saying is that there are some broader questions for governments to consider around this. An apprentice necessarily is someone also who has some vulnerabilities in her or his experience in the workplace, because they're not simply dependent on their employer for a paycheck, they're dependent for the qualification as well. There is quite a large body of evidence about the vulnerability of international students in the workplace too. So there's some really critical questions about getting the right fix in terms of a regulatory approach to this. As I say, this is a concept that has been discussed for quite some time in terms of clearly articulating firstly, exactly what an international apprenticeship would look like, and secondly, what demand there really is for that, as against perhaps some of the other issues that might lead to someone embarking upon a journey to Australia as an international student. The evidence is less clear. Similarly, the evidence is less clear on my read about the appetite for this in industry.
Okay, thank you.
What could it be trialled though? You say, what does an international apprenticeship look like? Couldn't it just be an international person doing an apprenticeship, and you could open up to a certain number of places?
Again, you say those words, but what do they mean? What is the pathway into Australia for that person? What are the expectations in terms of the visa system, which is obviously a really critical expression of our national interest, someone having a permission to come into Australia? What are the requirements on the employer? How would an employer source that person? How would we effectively regulate the training contract, and what happens beyond the training contract? So again, I think this is another debate that we should have, but I think it should be located in the two principles that I see as coming from it. What purposes are served by international education, and to what extent should engagement in the Australian labour market be part of the consideration when we look to international education? And then, what is the appropriate regulatory overlay that would support an arrangement like this?
So are you seeking to answer all those questions?
Well, again, I'm more keen on making sure that on the one hand, the systems for which I am responsible for, together with my state and territory colleagues, I should say, the Australian domestic training system is working effectively to open up opportunities to Australians. That does not mean neglecting the questions that Julie has just raised, but seeking to make clear that the proposition which has been articulated from time to time is, in my view, no silver bullet to the challenges facing the Australian labour market.
And I don't like putting things in people's mouths, so to clarify, you're not keen to go down that path? Is that a fair way to put
I'm
it?
not persuaded that it is a fruitful path to go down.
Okay. Patrick Commons from The Guardian.
Thanks very much, Minister. My question was about prior learning, particularly among migrants, and recognition of qualifications, overseas qualifications. Seems to be a broad acceptance that this is an issue. There's a lot of migrants in Australia who are working below their skill level and, like you say, could be contributing more to the economy. So if there's broad recognition, I feel like there hasn't been much progress in this area for quite a while, despite this broad recognition. Where are the roadblocks? What's the resistance to doing more in this area? Do you need to be more ambitious in trying to push this issue a little bit further in terms of recognising overseas qualifications?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. There's about 6 questions in that. I'll try and step through them. But I'll start with saying that, as hopefully my speech made clear, we are concerned to make sure that everyone in Australia can effectively contribute for reasons of their own well-being and for reasons of the demands of our labour market. In doing that, I think we've got to be clear-eyed about what it is we're trying to do and some of the roadblocks. One of them is, I think we've got to be clear. I think there's 2 questions which I touch on very briefly in my remarks. There is the first one about someone who's coming here as a skilled migrant, generally employer-sponsored, to make sure that we are as efficient as possible at connecting them to the labour market. That's the offshore question. I think the work on that is quite well advanced. The bigger question is this untapped resource, which has been recently highlighted, of people who are in Australia, perhaps who came from a humanitarian pathway, perhaps who may be the partner of a skilled migrant, or perhaps maybe a skilled migrant who's had issues in the labour market. Some of those issues relate to skills recognition, not all of them do, and I think we need to be clear about that. The question about recognition of prior learning is important, though, in 2 senses. One, I think it's clear that abuses of RPL have been at the absolute centre of a lot of the problems we've seen in undermining the integrity of our vet system. So making sure that those issues have been addressed is foundational, and I'm really pleased at the work that Saxon Rice has led in ASQA, thanks to some of the decisions, particularly that my predecessor Brendan O'Connor made in terms of legislative change and enforcement. I'm also really hopeful that the work that we committed to at the election around advanced entry trades training will give us the confidence to look more broadly at how we can do recognition of prior learning in a way that maintains community confidence and social licence on the one hand, and a quicker pathway to working at level on the other. There's ongoing work more broadly about skills recognition. It's a really complicated piece of work with lots of stakeholders involved. That doesn't mean that we don't continue to work at it, but I think we've got to also recognise that it's a very diffuse area, and again, getting that balance right between maximising contribution on the one hand and maintaining community confidence and social licence on the other is a real tension point.
Corey McLeod, an NPC board member.
Thank you for your address, Minister. Corey McLeod from innovationoz.com. I just wanted to talk about the economic roundtables last week, and the Treasurer saying following that there was a great appetite to work with the Jobs and Skills Councils. Obviously, that speed and getting the right skills into industry is paramount at the moment. Are there sort of timelines or further thinking about what that might look like? And a second question, I haven't heard much about micro-credentialing for a long time. Has that sort of dropped from view at a time where people with qualifications getting into industry is vital?
Well, I'll start with that one. No, I don't think it has. I think particularly in the context of tech and AI, there's a lot of discussions about it. The place where Jason, Claire, Amanda and I held our forum to feed into the Economic Reform Roundtable was TAFE New South Wales Meadowbank campus, and that's a place that's delivered hundreds of thousands of micro-credentials and other skill sets in partnership principally with Microsoft, industry and some university partners. So that's something that's very much on my mind as we think about the lifelong learning approach. So again, if it was left out, I was hoping to speak for an hour so I didn't have any questions, but I was told by the press club that that's not the done thing. But it's not off the radar. I think the challenge though with the micro skills question is getting the balance right between the ability to contribute to the work of an employer and the sort of transferable skills we want to make sure our labour market is adaptive and productive as possible. I guess on the other question is I'm super keen to see the JSCs play a bigger role. They're now organisations in a state of maturity that really allow us to boost the industry engagement. I think initially the focus was on, the training packages. I think there's so much more we can get them to do. I was really excited that this was a feature of discussion at the Economic Reform Roundtable. Again, as I touched on briefly, I think the careers space is something where they can do a lot of work. And I was really pleased that there seems to be a really broad consensus about that in particular. I guess my answer on the skills piece that I think was implied in your question is sort of similar to my answer to Patrick's. We want these things done yesterday, but we want them done right. That's the tension. But I think they are now at a level of maturity. If you look at some of the work that's being done, particularly the pilots in the tech space, I think we are seeing real progress. So I'm feeling pretty good about the evolution of the JSCs. I was really pleased to see that recognised last week.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you had an hour, it'd be the Politicians Club, I guess. Let's go to Nick Stewart from Ability News.
I was going to congratulate you. You actually kept within 3 seconds of half an hour with your speech, which is really quite remarkable, particularly, as Tom says, for a politician. You also mentioned people with disability 5 times in your speech, and I was wondering if you see TAFE as being a real opening, not just for people with disability, but for people who are outside the normal structure to get qualifications that they can then use to get into a job that leads to further qualifications and keeps on going around in a virtuous circle. Do you think that that's the answer? And secondly, if that is the way you're going, is this sort of a Andrew Giles 1.0 speech, and will we be seeing further speeches in your time as Minister as you elaborate further developments for the sector, not just at the TAFE level, but also at the university and higher areas?
Okay, answer the first question, yes. As to further speeches, well, that's probably a matter for a combination of the National Press Club and my Chief of Staff, so we'll work that through. But I guess to give a less glib answer, the thing that animates my speech is a deep belief in the capacities of Australians and all of us, and a recognition then that the challenge for governments, Michael, is to put in place the systems and send the broader signals that allow those talents to be realised. And I think what we are seeing, and the stats sort of suggest this, but it's the stories that I think go deeper than the stats, is that free TAFE in particular has broken down barriers, not just cost, but other barriers that have held back Australians from gaining skills and qualifications that they may have wanted to for some time. And obviously for Australians with disability, we've got a large cohort with extraordinary capacity who have been much less active in the labour market than they wanted to be. Unlocking that has got to be a critical role of our skills and training architecture and of the Australian government. So hopefully I'll get a chance to touch on that on another occasion.
When the NDIS was conceived, part of the concept was that people with a disability would work in much higher numbers and it would almost be neutral to the budget, which hasn't happened. Are you doing anything actively in that space?
Well, it's not just about the NDIS, of course. That's not, as obviously everyone would gather from the recent conversation, that doesn't cover the field when we're talking about the experiences and the lives and working opportunities of people with disability. Again, I'll let that conversation play out. What I'm concerned to do broadly is to open more doors to more Australians to gain skills to be active in the labour market on those terms and to remain active in the labour market, and to recognise that this is a large group of Australians who historically we have not done well by.
Julie Hare.
Hi, so one of the things that you mentioned in your speech is the bringing together of, or a closer relationship between TAFE's vocational education and higher education. For those of us who've been around for a few years, we know that this has been spoken about endlessly since at least Denise Bradley released her report in 2010. And in fact, during that kind of decade, they became further and further apart. Now, Barney knows I hate this phrase, but tertiary harmonization is just not going to get written into a newspaper story or on a media report anywhere. It's just really awful. So it seems to me there's a missing middle that just how we bring those together. Now then, you know, Barney has talked about the technical colleges in South Australia, which gives kids in years 10 to 12 really hands-on experience in vocational areas. There's the Institutes of Advanced Technology there's I think 5 or 3 in New South Wales, but they're very expensive because they're something that was starting up from scratch, but they bring together universities, TAFEs and business. And then there is the University of South Australian experiment with higher degree apprenticeships. So can we create harmonisation when the way forward seems to be rather ad hoc and piecemeal, or do you have a grand strategy?
Well, I'm firstly very disappointed, Julie, that you don't think tertiary harmonisation is going to light up the front, particularly of papers other than the Financial Review, because that was really the basis upon which I agreed to deliver this speech. So we're kind of at a difficult point. I guess what I'd say is two things. One, I think the efforts which have been led by Jason around unlocking some of the technical questions, and we've put a fair bit of money into this already, is actually quite important. Finding ways to enable people to effectively jump between the pathways. Again, it's not going to be on anyone's front page, but it is important work. But maybe I'll be more substantive in my comments in agreeing with you that I think what we are seeing is a range of ways in which we'll use, I think this is the shared terminology here, a more joined up system of post-school education is happening. It's happening through the relationships that are being formed at the TAFE Centres of Excellence. It's happening through some of the settings you've talked about. It's happening at TAFE New South Wales Meadowbank campus. It's happening in the 7 dual sector universities, and I haven't seen Jenny Dodd in the room, and in the various TAFEs that are dual sector as well. So I think there's a combination of an iterative approach and a shaping role for government and both limbs of the sector. And I think it's also about finding, to go back to your starting point, it's about finding a common language that actually resonates with Australians, including the 13-year-olds maybe that we should be talking to about what might lie ahead for them.
So there isn't a grand strategy?
Well, there is a grand strategy, but I don't think the grand strategy alone can be relied on delivering it. We have a process of tertiary harmonisation that's away. We've had 27 odd million in the budget to work towards some of these initiatives to bring these things to fruition. But I don't think we should assume that can happen in isolation from both the organic actions that are bringing the two streams together and some of the more structured approaches, some of which I've just touched upon.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick Commons from The Guardian.
Hi again. You mentioned during your speech that the number of apprenticeships being completed has dropped to about 100,000 now. Is there, we think that's too low. Do we have an idea of how big the gap is? Like how many people should be completing apprenticeships in any given year? Is there a target around this, or is it just simply a sense that we need to be doing more?
Well, there certainly shouldn't be a target across the board because there's two elements to this. There's the numbers and then there's the apprenticeships that are being undertaken and how we better link them to jobs. I guess the critique that I would add to some of the comments I made about the former government was that the traineeships that were being undertaken had a very poor relationship to the jobs that were in a shortage. What we've been trying to do through the incentives that we have available is not only to get more people into these pathways, but to shape the pathways towards those areas of need. And obviously we need somewhere between 32 and 42,000 electrical workers in the not too distant future. That's obviously one focus. All of the skills related to housing construction, another focus. And obviously there are a range of manufacturing obligations too. So there's two things, wanting more people to be looking at this pathway and then shaping the sorts of pathways to ensure that they are leading towards the gaps which currently exist in our labour market.
Might end on a theoretical kitchen table conversation. Perhaps it's a parent that watched your speech today in a break room, or maybe even a student who was home from school. What would you hope their takeaway is if someone says, oh, what did Andrew Giles have to say about skills and what job you should have in the future? What would the takeaway be? What would you hope it would be?
Well, I hope that someone watching this who is thinking about their future or their kids' future would think that the Albanese government's on their side, that we recognise that we have a national responsibility to equip people for a world of work today and for a changing world of work into the future, and to give people the confidence to be thinking about what it is that they want to be doing, and to know that there's a government that's on their side to back them to acquire the skills, to acquire the qualifications that will help them do it.
We'll see about 2.0. We do have a membership though, so you are welcome back here. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank the Minister and his